Everybody, cuddle up. It is past 10. We still have some people filtering in.
And using the restroom.
Using the restrooms. So we're at, what, month?
7.
7 already. The third rope, in order to be able to do your third rope, you needed to sort of be able to correctly create your 2 rope. Did anybody have challenges with the third rope pattern?
Like the new part. We hope that you didn't have struggles with the part that we tested you on last month.
Yeah, because everybody seemed to do pretty well with that.
Exactly.
It wasn't a struggle, but it was a placement issue. I worked on Sassy here, and where we put the top of the TK and then the little flourish, the like swoosh that
Yeah.
goes afterwards, they were kind of at the same place.
Okay.
I think that it's maybe because of like the distance here.
Sure.
Okay.
So that's something I'm gonna look for more. Is that something we should watch out for, like structure?
No.
Okay.
Generally, especially with people with shorter torsos, that may be the case, and that's okay. We're gonna talk about sort of what the purpose of that rope is and what, sort of how to make sure that it's constructed properly, where it can be placed depending on how much space the person has. But yeah, it's okay if they are in line. That shouldn't be an issue.
And there are some choices that you can make that can change that. Like if you're like, oh, well, it's there and it works, but that's not what I would prefer from an aesthetic standpoint. We can sort of talk about changes that you can make in tying that will change the aesthetic of it.
Yeah, and not, let's see, 3 months from now, we're going to be having an entire class on variations of how you can construct that third rope pattern that will meet similar structural purpose, but with widely variant aesthetic. So.
And that way you can choose like what you prefer, what you feel looks best on the person that you're tying, and it won't just be stuck with that pattern in the front. It'll accomplish all of the same structural stuff in the back, but it'll do different things in the front that will work well and look great on different people.
Yeah. Any other questions or challenges? Yeah.
I don't know if this is too big a other topic, but is there, and at any point, are you all gonna address arm setting? Like sometimes teachers have certain ways of like setting arms.
So we did cover that in
A little bit in the first rope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Second class, third class.
What was the question?
The question was if we're gonna cover setting people's arms.
Yeah.
And sort of, we discussed a little bit about that in the first rope. I'm not super prescriptive about how to set somebody's arms because everyone's bodies and everyone's mobility is a little bit different.
Yeah.
I think the thing that I'd reinforce about the conversation that we had then was like, hey, this is an experimentation thing. And every time you tie someone new or interact with someone new, if you're going to, or if the two of you want to engage in tying their hands behind their back, you should spend a good amount of time figuring out where is comfortable for them. And there's a wide range of motions. I mean, I've had people be hyper flexible to where they can get their wrists like up to the middle underneath their neck, all the way until they can barely like sort of get their wrists around their hips. And you can create solutions for all of those different things. I think the thing is just to work with the person that you're tying to sort of go through the process of, okay, do they want to orient their arms themselves? Do they want you to orient them for them? What's the amount of turning in the socket that they prefer? What's the amount of bending of the elbow that they prefer? And sort of gently working with that rotation, working with that bend to come to a place that's most comfortable for them.
Yeah, and if that's something that you specifically want to work on, I can talk with you outside of like actual class time to show you a few other different ways that you might experiment with getting hands into the position that you are comfortable in.
Yeah, or that you're interested in. If you have
Yeah.
like, oh, my hands are here, but I want stretches to figure out how to get my goal, or if I have a goal to get my hands like to this other place, can you help me sort of walk through that? We have some ideas that'll be helpful.
I've had different instructors have different ways that they do. It's always interesting to me to see different people's, the way they do it. So I was just wondering.
And so have we, but we've also run into, I've tied enough people and Melissa has tied enough people where we're just like, cool, like a singular approach does not fit everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, so we tried to show, I think, 2 or 3 different options when we did the first rope, but there are even more that we didn't get to that are kind of better shown one-on-one.
Yeah. So we're going to have a warm up that harkens back to the second class that we ever took, which you remember the second class. The second class was on rope and intention and tying with intention. And the homework that we had given you for that month was to go home and to do those one rope exercises where you're sort of formlessly wrapping the body with a singular intention in mind, and then have the person that you're tying guess what that intention is. So the change that we have for today's warm-up is that we want you to do that same experiment. So pick an intention for the people who are tying. Pick, this is my single word, intention. And then you're going to tie the 2-rope hands behind tie, or 2-rope hands in front tie, or 2-rope tie, however you're going to tie it, given that intention. So you need to take the thing that is in your brain and execute it while you are doing a pattern. Does that make sense to everyone? Any questions about it? A reminder from the last time we did this, I would probably lean into that quadrant or area of intentions or emotions that are pretty positive, given the experimental nature of the space that we're in now. Leaning into something that is intense or negative might create intensely negative outcomes, and we like to avoid that if possible. So try to stay as much as you can towards the positive side of things, but pick an intention, make sure it's really strong in your head, and then figure out a way to sort of get that intention through your rope while you're tying the 2-rope.
And if you're like, I am blanking on what an intention might be, come see us. We
I
can
will
give you one. Cool.
All right, so
10 minutes.
we're gonna have 10 minutes for this exercise. So grab your rope, grab your person.
Let us know if you need an intention.
this isn't something that we've typically done in classes before, but what I wanted to try to do with this class was reintegrate the idea of that intention into all of the patterns that we create, because whether you like it or not, when you are tying someone, even if you are not actively thinking about what your intention is, the person who is being tied is going to fill up that void with a narrative of their own. So it's important for you to think about those things going into a tie. And it's difficult. The more complicated a pattern becomes, the more complex a thing that you're trying to construct, the more difficult it is to reflect your intention and connect with the person that you're tying with. So start to actively think about, when you're tying, when you're doing scenes, oh cool, the more complicated this becomes, the easier it is to obfuscate the thing that I'm trying to communicate, right? So as much as you can, try to pay attention to that when you are tying. Are we back on yet, Nora?
Yep, we're on.
Cool. So in the 3-rope pattern, there are 3 new components that y'all have not engaged with yet. The Munter hitch, the twist and shout, the flag, what's the 4th one?
The box to lock everything off,
Oh, yeah. And then there's the X at the end to lock everything off.
the big X lock
Yeah.
thing.
All of these things, essentially to their components, are folding rope. And folding rope becomes more and more specific and difficult. Munter hitches themselves are pretty complicated bit of construction. And I kind of want to go through
We
what
have an
makes
exercise.
a well-constructed Munter hitch
Yeah.
and what does not. And I'm going to do so by giving you a couple of examples, and then we're going to do an exercise so you can learn to identify this yourselves. So, for a good Munter hitch, you're going to be folding the rope 3 times. So you want to fold one rope around the other rope as it connects. And you want it to be closed rather than open. And closed has to do with the angle in which the rope is exiting the friction in order to reinforce the friction and keep it in place, right?
Yeah,
Could you stand for me?
absolutely. So the thing with Munter hitches is that if it is not closed,
This side of you.
it will be more readily able to move along the line that it is crossing. And you'll see what we mean in just a second as Andrew gets this tied. But when it is closed, because you're adding additional friction of the rope against the other rope, it makes it less easy for that line, for that friction to move. If it's open, it can kind of freely drift, which is the opposite of what we want.
So I'm going to tie a couple wraps around Melissa's legs. If you want to see this, you can move a little bit closer.
Yeah. And as long as you're basically on that lighter mat, you won't be strained. Whew, my legs are tight. So, and just a quick note about the name of this friction is called a Munter because it is named after a person. He was a rock climber in Switzerland, I believe. So it is a proper name, that's why you'll see it capitalized. That's that guy's name.
All right.
Woo,
So
Munter hitches.
I've created 2 Munter hitches. One of them is closed, and one of them is open. Can you tell me why one is closed and one is open? Or do you understand what it means that one is closed and one is open?
Because of the angle it's going on.
Mhm.
Correct. In this instance, you want this angle from the rope that it intersects to the rope that it's exiting to be less than 90 degrees. If it is greater than 90 degrees,
Here, this angle.
it's open.
And like, I can move this really easily, right? This one, not so much. Like, still moves, but the tighter this line is to, right? The more that tight that angle is, the less easily it can move.
The second bit is both of these are folded sort of 3 times, right?
No, this
So-
one's not. It kinda is.
It is.
Yeah.
So in this instance, it folds a second time, it folds a third time.
And if you remember from when we did the half moon, when we're talking about folding, literally the rope goes here and then like folds over on itself rather than wrapping in the same plane, right? It actually flips over.
The thing that you'll often see is
Wrapping,
something that looks like this.
like kind of curled around. We almost never want our rope to just curl around.
Right?
Or like even, yeah, so like that, where it's like a circle. And that's pretty, but you're not really doing much when you do that.
And it's also not the most efficient pathway around the rope, and not being the most efficient pathway around the rope. The rope wants to move to where it is most efficient,
Yeah.
right? That's what it always wants to do when it's put under pressure. So when this is put under pressure, it's going to move to the place it wants to go to, which is going to change the tension of your
Yeah.
rope, which is going to change the tension of your top.
Right, so instead of this kind of curve, we want to fold it over on itself and then fold it over on itself again. So it's folding, it's passed under.
Does that make sense? Excellent. So your exercise is
And-
going to be taking
Yeah.
one rope, wrapping the person that you're tying, could be the leg, could be the torso, could be wherever, and you're just gonna make a bunch of Munter hitches,
Yeah.
as
So-
many as you can.
Basically this, like just wrap around and then change direction, and every time you cross that other line, make a munter. And we'll see which ones are open, which ones are closed, which ones are going the correct direction.
Are they
One-
folded, are
yeah,
they not
okay.
folded?
One note I will give is if the original pass that you make, like the first wrapping, isn't tight enough, when you make your munter, it's gonna wanna flip over. So make sure that that first line is nice and snug, and then it will get tighter as you add munter hitches, but that's okay. Leaving it really loose is just gonna make them all flip over and get wonky. So make sure you add enough tension on that first pass. Cool, go ahead and try. How long do you want them to have for this?
Let's do
8 minutes?
8 minutes. How are we feeling about Munter hitches after looking at and exploring them for a while?
Open versus closed, folded. Did people experience that, like, where the whole thing kind of flipped over and it was just wonky? Yeah.
One of the questions that I got asked was sort of around, like, is there a decision tree
Ah,
that is sort of like, if then, if I'm doing this, then the Munter hitch needs to do this, then I need to do this, right? I have tried to figure out a way to quantify this is the rule of Munter hitches, like if this, then this, and it does this for the entire time that I am tying, and every time I think that I have a rubric in my head, I come upon a use case that breaks it. So the sad thing is, the best advice that I can give you is you just have to look at it and then think about it and then figure it out, right? I wish I could make it a lot easier for you. I wish I could make it a lot easier for me, but sadly I cannot.
the nice thing is that if there are certain patterns that you tie frequently enough, at certain points in them, there will be Munter hitches that you are using that do follow a specific execution path.
Presuming you're tying the same person.
Even, mm,
If somebody is wide enough in their back,
Yeah.
the Munter hitch that you need to use in their back. will
not
change.
on the back, but the one at the wrist cuff. Anyway, I have one that consistently I am able to do in one place, in one instance, every time the same way, but that's a very small use case. For the most part, you do have to like kind of look at it and make sure it's correct every time.
Yeah. So with that said, now that we're warmed up from our intentions exercise and our folding exercise, let's see your 3-rope gotes. Tie me that pattern, please. Let's say we've got another 8 minutes to do that thing.
So we're back
All right.
in, y'all?
So, for the most part, in the ties that I looked at, everybody had the components in the right place. Things for the most part were pretty well balanced. Things for the most part were pretty well symmetrical. For having only worked on this for a month, y'all did a pretty good job. So good job. I'm gonna go through some of the finer points when we come back, but we're gonna take a quick 10-minute break. So grab some water, go to the bathroom. Before you all do that, before you run away, Coco.
Oh, Coco.
Before you run away, Coco, can you take us off the stream?
Yeah. We're dropping the stream for a second because we want to talk to y'all about a couple things.
Cool. All right, everybody. We are back in.
Hey, y'all, we're back.
Hey, y'all. We're back in. I'm going to talk about some of the finer points of the back portion of this pattern. I'm positioning Melissa for the camera, so you might want to.
If you need to cheat to see better, please do that thing.
So
We have plenty of space today.
I'm going to start with the 2-rope that everyone here should be familiar with. It's going to be a little wild for me because this is brand new rope, and it is stiff, both stiff and thicker than my previous rope. So it's been a fun time trying to learn how to rehandle rope when that size of rope is wildly different.
Like 2 centimeters thicker than the previous rope. It's sizable. Anyway,
It's a chunky boy.
so you all know this part, right? We're doing kanuki for the 2-rope. But as soon as you're done with kanuki, we're gonna get into the new component. Like a twist and shout, which doesn't mean anything, but it is a useful term that most people will understand.
I believe the twist and shout was named the twist and shout by Osana Steve.
Okay.
It is alternately known
The twisty fucker.
as the twisty fucker, as named by Hedley.
So you might hear a couple different terms for it. Those are the only ones I'm familiar with.
There is an important bit about this
Yeah.
that is, I'm gonna come out.
Oh, before you actually do that though, would you clear the bottom round, please? No, on that side of it. On the left. There we go. Yeah.
All right, so
How do we do
a
a twist and
couple
shout?
things about twist and shout. Thing number 1 is placement. So as you can see from Melissa, Melissa's got pretty pronounced shoulder blades. I want to put the twist and shout inside of the shoulder blade.
Meaning
So it should fit
toward the spine.
in this area, closer to the spine than it is to the arm. If you put it here, when this rope gets pulled up, you're just going to have that rope sitting on the blade of the shoulder. That will not be pleasant.
Do not like.
Thing number 2,
Very painful. Most people don't have a ton of like muscular padding on their shoulder blade, so it is not an ideal placement to put a knot there.
thing number 2 is the motion of how this is created. So you're going to put 2 fingers in, and you're going to fold.
Like flip it over.
You're going to flip it over, right?
That's the twist part.
When you have the twist part down, you pass the rope to the 2 fingers, and then pull it out. And then the motion for tightening it is tighten it this way, and then tighten it this way. And if you do it properly, it'll be nice and small, it'll be folded. This takes a lot of fine motor work in practicing that little move in order for it to be efficient and small and not twisted.
Yeah. So one nice thing that I try to practice is just making that loop for the twist small, right? The bigger you make the loop, the more slack you're gonna have to pull out, the harder it's gonna be to control that tension and get it nice and tight to the line.
Right? Second thing is I put a little bit of tension into this.
So it's going up, right?
Right.
The wrap itself should descend a tiny bit upward as you create your backpack straps or these vertical lines.
Mm-hmm. The next bit is sandwiching this kanuki, right? Part of the reinforcement that we're using, part of the reason that we're reinforcing this tie is for the idea of suspension. If this kanuki moves this way or moves this way, it can become unpleasant and pinch the body. So I want to hold it away from the arm by making this little move right here. Come back around, and it's the same operation. I want to pass through here. I want to make my little thing. I want to twist with my 2 fingers.
So are you gonna twist and twist? So
else?
No twist?
I have a question about that.
Sure.
Do you, when you make the twist, is there a way to remember which direction to twist? Do you always twist towards the stem or twist
The-
towards the way?
You
Um,
twist toward the stem. So you essentially twist to the back, like toward the person's back.
So the
Does
way,
that make sense?
the way I think of it is that you always twist
Toward the
to
stem.
put the running ends on top of the standing
Okay.
ends. Right? I don't, if I thought about it like toward the spine or away from the spine, my brain would explode. The way that I think of it is that the running ends always have to be below,
I see.
Mhm.
right?
Like toward the body.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Depending on how you're doing this, I have worked out a way to do this with my fingers where it stays flat. There are some folks, as you're learning this, where you may need to, if this isn't flat, you may need to adjust by twisting this bit of the rope.
Yeah.
So if you twist this, it's gonna lay more efficiently on the body, right?
Andrew, which bit is this bit of the rope?
The running ends. So the running ends right now, right, they're flat. I want to twist the running ends to create a loop. Rope goes through. I tighten. And then I tighten. And I'm underneath the shoulder blade on both sides. Ideally, you want this distance to be about the same.
So the distance on either side to the twist and shout
Yep.
from the stem should be equal, roughly.
Ideally, you
I'm
want
not-
this displacement to be about the same.
I am not symmetrical between my shoulder blades, so you might notice that they're not quite the same.
I cheat this one farther in because I know that this shoulder blade on Melissa's bigger. This is from tying the same person for 11 years. I just know like, oh, this shoulder blade is like 3 millimeters smaller, so I need to cheat this one in so that this one will fit and it'll still be symmetrical. I create my Munter hitch, which for Melissa, and the size of Melissa's back, Melissa's width, needs to come from under. Again, I know this after 11 years of tying Melissa. I'm gonna go over, again to the outside of the Munter.
The Kanuki?
Kanuki, excuse me. So many words.
Yeah. Question?
Yeah, what is size of shoulders have to do with the direction?
Direction, yeah.
What's
So,
the question?
because,
Oh.
the question is, the question was, what does the width of the shoulders have to do with how the Munter hitch in the back is constructed?
The wider the shoulders are, so if Melissa's shoulders were like this wide,
Like Andrew's size.
if I went from under, so the wider this gets, the more open this gets. And if it's that far open, then I need it to come from the top as opposed to the bottom in order to be closed. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
You would like
Yeah,
to
I
see?
need to think about it because I think I always do the mentor there.
So if Melissa's shoulders were this wide, we're out here, and I was folding this here, this would now be an open Munter, right?
Okay.
That's the check.
Yeah. So in that case, you would need to construct it the opposite way so that you are coming from below to then come above to run out toward the shoulder. I think that's right.
Yeah. So the broader someone's shoulders are, the more that pattern's gonna change. I need to reset all of this, because I pulled all of my tension out.
Yeah.
Twist, twist, tight, reset. I find that with this rope being thicker, I have to take a whole lot of care to squeeze frictions. It makes the normal speed with which I tie slow down a lot.
It's not just the width, it's that it's stiff,
Yeah.
so you have to work to compact the rope.
Yep.
When you get a chance, will you clear the pass? Oh, what is it? Nope, on my right side where the line ran under the Kanuki. I think this needs a little
Is that it?
finesse. No, yeah, yes, there. Thank you. All right, I couldn't even
Through
get words to explain that.
to the inside. This time I'm going to the inside of this Kanuki to create a little sandwich bit.
Mhm.
So my sandwich bit goes there.
And so, the way I remember it is that the sort of backpack straps, the vertical lines are gonna go toward the outside of the kaniki. And then because the next pass is gonna be the one that draws those together, that's gonna be closer, so that's gonna go to the inside for your sandwiching of the kaniki.
So, connect.
You wanna connect after you?
Aesthetically, some people will not want to connect in front.
Right.
I leave it
Also-
up to you.
Also, for some people, generally myself included, but for our purposes right now, it doesn't really matter. Without a lot of padding along the breastbone, that can be really unpleasant to have a connection point there. So just, whoever you're tying with, make sure that they would be comfortable with it there.
So I'm going from under to over.
What does that mean? Does anybody know?
So I passed under this diagonal line and then over this diagonal line to make this symmetrical.
So I noticed, no one did it in class today, but in general, sometimes people will think like, oh, I always go under both. If you do under both, it's gonna be asymmetrical, right? It's gonna look like an infinity almost, right?
Yeah.
Because you're going under and then under again, and it's not gonna be balanced. One nice thing about coming from underneath to then wrap over is that the line runs on top of what were vertical lines, to create this horizontal. Will you demonstrate the pull?
The what?
The pull of the,
Yeah, that's what I was about
okay,
to do.
cool.
So, in order to make these two symmetrical, if you want them to be symmetrical on the body, to increase tension, I would recommend from the front, pull here, take slack out, and then I'm gonna do my twist here.
And I will say, everyone, when you tied it, you have really nicely done the horizontal line, like they were
Yeah.
all very nicely straight across. So good job with that. One thing to look for when you are constructing this pattern, just so you know, a lot of people will refer to this, sort of horizontal line across with those two, what were vertical lines that are now kind of diagonal. They'll refer to that as the Mount Fuji pattern because it kind of looks like
It's a little mountain.
a plateau or the top of
It's a little
a
mountain and a
volcano.
snow cap. There's a little snow cap peak at the top of it.
So you may hear people say like, oh, you made a Mount Fuji, like, sure, okay. That's this thing that we created. And one thing that we're looking for with that is that the twisted part is also perfectly horizontal. If it is tipping to one side or the other, it means your tension isn't right in the lines that are going to the back.
One of these or one of these is intentioned properly.
Right. The bottom part, actually,
Yeah.
like the line that's going to the back, is either too tight or too loose, and that's why it's not balanced.
So, to the back piece, I pass it between the lines, and this is where I'm gonna make my first flag.
So these are the flags.
So,
And the reason for that is that like it comes up vertically, and then it has a horizontal part, kind of like a flag on a flagpole.
no one has a name for this. We named it a flag for lack of anything else to call it.
Mm.
So, I'm gonna go over my first wrap.
So over the wrap,
Behind
behind
the
the
diagonal.
diagonal, then in front of the diagonal, and
And fold over.
behind the wrap.
And then why I'm going behind the wrap and folding is that I'm pinning this fold. I'm pinning this fold to the Munter hitch so it doesn't move. So now it's pinned there, right?
And
Yeah.
can you please adjust the line on my collarbone on my left side? Yeah, outward, my left, yep. Thank you, outward just a touch. Yeah, that's good, thank you.
Right? And then I'm gonna Munter hitch. I know that I wanna go back towards the hands. So when I Munter hitch, I'm gonna be in the opposite place from the place that I wanna go, because that's gonna close my Munter hitch down.
So this is the part that I was saying, like, I can always count on this going the same direction. Because I know I want it to exit toward the wrist, I always go to the outside first, then to the inside, and then it exits toward the wrist.
One wrap around the wrist.
Another,
Here's a little secret.
so this is another twist and shout, because it's gonna mirror what we did with the Munter hitch. So it's not 2 Munter hitches, it's 1 Munter and 1 twist and shout.
It is really hard to get this tension to match this tension, especially if you're doing a twist and shout. How to solve for that is to cheat. The way you cheat,
Is by one, not doing a wrap, like a full wrap at the wrist, really? Like, it's kind of a loose wrap, if anything.
so I'm gonna make my twist and shout much closer to the spine.
Like at the stem, basically.
Like almost at the stem. In this instance, I have a connection that prevents me from doing that. But I'm gonna make it as close as possible to the stem. Once I pull through, tighten, tighten, and then I shift this out to match my other one. And when I shift it out, it tightens this tension, and it brings them into balance. Does that make sense?
Because you have enough slack kind of running through that system there, that you're just balancing the slack to the opposite side, to the side that you just added the twist and shout. Like you're pulling whatever slack there was from the first side and just redistributing it across both. Does that make sense? Sweet.
Make my second flag in the same way. I go over to under.
Over the wrap, behind the diagonal, on top of the wrap.
Question
Or-
on the flag,
Yeah.
do you try to stack them on top of the previous notch there?
I don't try to stack them. Yeah, I try to make them as tightened together as possible.
What's the question?
The question is if these are stacked one on top of each other. Is
So
that
if
what you mean?
Right, versus on this,
It's not on top of each other. They're right. It's not
right,
It's always stacking.
physically layered. It is directly on top of
Right.
it.
So the way I think of it is sort of like your spine. Your vertebrae are not layered outward away from your body, they're stacked vertically, right? So your flag should be stacked vertically on top of your Munter and around it. It should be surrounding it, not laying on top of it. Does that make sense?
yes.
Cool.
Okay. So once we're done here, we're going to create our final X bit. And you want to, the easiest way to do this is to make a loop here, pass it all the way to the bottom bit, and then pull.
And for those of you in rope, if you have the ability to arch your back, I recommend doing it at this point to give them like a little bit more space to get in and around that box. I find that to be helpful so that they're not like dragging rope against your spine.
And then I'm making a big X that's capturing all of the lines. Right?
Can I ask about the big X?
Sure.
What are we accomplishing with the big X?
So,
What's the question?
The question was, what is the purpose of this giant X that locks everything together at the end?
so why this exists, ultimately? This single column tie is a pretty fragile tie, right? This tie was initially done by Hajime Kinoko, who does a lot of dynamic transition work, right? If this knot becomes loose, this starts to collapse. This creates a longer stem that creates a whole lot of problems within this TK. This keeps those wraps together. So if anything happens with this, it's not a problem.
It also.
The reason that this is such a fragile knot is that if Kinoko ever needs to release somebody's wrists only, it's very easy to do.
He also purposely wants to join the two wraps together, right? That's why it's a big X and not just the girth hitch in between like we did for the 2-rope. He wants that whole structure of both wraps to move as a single unit so that they don't pull. If we were only attaching to the top wrap, it would be more likely that the stem could change. But by doing the giant X, we're drawing those two passes together and then locking them in the center so that it works as more of a single unit. Does that make sense?
Answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool.
Any additional questions?
You'll notice like people like Akechikana, excuse me, or others will reinforce this in a different way that'll make a trade-off where you can't release the hands, but then you don't have to do this part. Like this is sort of the engineering trade-offs that people will make in order to sort of accomplish these things that they want to accomplish, right? So Akechikana oftentimes will solve this problem by taking this and tying it into the original X friction.
Yeah. having
So
the
it doubles the
stem-
size of the stem.
Mhm.
It makes sure that the stem can't change because now this is tied into the structure of the entire tie. So you don't need this bit at the end, but it accomplishes the same thing, but you can't release the hands, right? That's the trade-off you make. Finally, I'm gonna put a girth hitch around all of this. This gets very busy with this level of thickness of rope. So normally,
So again, I'm kind of arching my back to give more space in there for the rope and fingers to move a little bit more freely.
and when you tie this girth hitch, if this is tight, so I'm gonna pull all of the tension out of it. And then I'm gonna pull this last bit of rope through. It's gonna sit to one side. It's not gonna be in the middle. If it's in the middle, it's not tight.
Yeah.
And so I've got this extra rope.
If it's in the middle, you haven't taken as much slack out as you could.
I've got this extra rope that I want to arrange into something that is going to be,
That looks like a belly rope.
I was going to do both.
Okay.
Here we are. Right. Got a little bit of extra rope. We sort of talked about this when we talked about the 2 rope. I'm gonna do this.
So because I know he's doing cuffs, I'm flattening my hands so that he can go around them more easily and I don't have to worry about my fingers getting smashed or pinched in a weird way.
And then I can,
And I'm keeping my fingers together so he doesn't catch one in a weird way unexpectedly. He may choose to catch fingers, but that would be a choice.
not a happy accident. Right.
All right, so are there any questions about any of those components or details that we've covered just now? I know it's a lot, but again, a lot of it's in the video. But this is more context for why to do the things. Does anyone want to come feel tension? I can come to you. They're not on the Yes, yes. You don't have to. I offer you. Yeah. Can you touch your rope? Can you touch the thing I just offered for you?
class is for y'all to practice tying this and to work on the little intricacies of what you're tying.
It looks nice.
So take your time, work through those things. Are you okay if somebody unties?
Yeah.
Does somebody want to untie Melissa?
Well, I was gonna, I mean, Heather, do you wanna untie while they work on their tying?
Go ahead. All right.
So we're tying this again.
Yeah, just practicing. Yeah.
Oh, let's see. So you